Although you hear so much about the Arab-Israeli conflict, there are many basic aspects that people don't know about, so I've summarized the essentials here. Now let's start at the beginning. Israel said yes. You might look at the situation and think to yourself, why not just split the land into two? A Jewish state where Jews live and an Arab state where Arabs live. Well, this is exactly what the UN said in 1947. The Jews said yes, and the Arabs said no and started a war. And by the way, the partition plan didn't specify a Palestinian state, but an Arab state. And I will say why in a minute. Now you might say, why should they share it? It is their land. The Jews stole it from them. And so here we come to point number 2. Israel wasn't established on stolen Arab soil. Unlike the first European settlers in North America and Australia, who took the land from the natives, the Jews bought all the land they settled on. Show me one case in which Jews took land that didn't belong to them before 1948. And by the way, I can give you many names of Jewish villages that had to be evacuated because of Arab violence in the 20s and the 30s. Hebron, Hartuv, Bnei Yehuda, Kfar Shiloach. I will leave the complete list below. And by the way, another fact that people are not aware of is that Jews have always lived in the land of Israel. Even before the advent of Zionism, there were more Jews living in Jerusalem than Muslims. In 1870, there were 11,000 Jews and only 7,000 Muslims in Jerusalem. After the 1948 war, the Arab lost some land, but this is what happens when you start a war. You might lose. Look at the Germans. They started a war in 1939 and lost 25% of their territory. You don't hear about any Germans wanting to reclaim their lost territory from Poland. The State of Israel wasn't established as compensation for the Holocaust. Another misconception that many people have, including Israelis by the way, is that Israel was established as compensation for the Holocaust. The notion that the world was so shocked by the Holocaust that it gave the Jews a country is very naive. This is not how world politics work. The establishment of Israel, like the establishment of many other countries, has more to do with the outcome of World War II. After every world war, World War I, World War II, and the Cold War, there is a new world order. After World War II, many countries were established on the territories of the French, British, and Japanese empires that had collapsed: Jordan, Syria, Pakistan, India, South and North Korea, and Israel. Jews and Arabs didn't live together peacefully in Arab countries. The idea that Jews live peacefully in Muslim countries before the advent of Zionism is false. Yes, there was a golden age of peaceful coexistence, but it was short and it dates back 800 years. In all Muslim countries where Jews lived, from Morocco in the west to Iran in the east, from Syria in the north to Yemen in the south, Jews suffered discrimination, pogroms, and racial violence before the advent of Zionism. After the establishment of Israel, almost all of the Jews who lived in Arab countries, some 800,000 people, had to flee to Israel. The name says it all. We are called Jews because we come from Judea, the area around Jerusalem. Simple. But where does the name Palestine comes from? In order to understand this, you need to go 2,000 years back. Jews lived in the land of Israel under Roman rule. In the year 132, the Jews rebelled. The Romans wanted to punish the Jews, so they changed the name from Judea to Palestine. The Romans didn't invent the name. The name was first mentioned in the writing of Herodotus, the Greek historian, to describe the land of the Philistines. The name then spread out from the Romans to many European languages, but it was never a name of a people, only a name of a region. My grandmother, who was born in 1937 in Mandatory Palestine, is actually more Palestinian than most Palestinians living today. True Palestinians are only those Jews, Christian, Muslims who were born in Mandatory Palestine between 1920 to 1948. Now, let's say that you don't agree with me and you believe that Palestinians existed in the past, then please write me in the comments below a name of one Palestinian leader from the 18th century, from the 13th century, from the 5th century, put a link to an ancient Palestinian coin or a flag, but you don't need to go that far back. Even in the 30s, when the Arab revolt against the British, it was called the Arab Revolt, not the Palestinian Revolt. Some who are anti-Israel say that Israel is a colonialist project. No, it is the other way around. When the British and the French drew lines on maps at the end of World War I, they created not only borders, but nations, the Palestinians and the Jordanians. Now you might say that I'm dwelling on history too much. What about the problems of today? Which brings me to the next point, the Palestinian refugees. There is a lot of exaggeration surrounding the Arab-Israeli conflict, but there is also one huge lie, and it involves the Palestinian refugees. As a result of the war in 1948, some 700,000 Arabs had to leave their homes. Many of them had to leave their homes because the Arab leadership had told them to leave their homes and that they could come back after they had killed all the Jews. And yes, like all wars, there were some acts of evacuation. At the same time, as I said before, some 800,000 Jews had to flee Muslim countries and start a new life in Israel. Unlike the Arabs who had started a war against the Jews living in Muslim countries had never committed acts of violence against Muslims. In the 20th centuries, there have been tens of millions of refugees. After World War II, entire population migrated. Here are two examples. More than 10 million Germans had to leave their homes in what was previously an eastern territory of Germany. When India and Pakistan were founded, about 15 million Muslims and Hindus became refugees. Now, on which topic have you heard more in recent years? About the 700,000 Palestinian refugees or about the millions of Germans, Pakistani, and Hindu refugees? There is one topic that you hear about all the time, the Palestinian refugees. And why is that? This brings us to the next point, two refugee agencies. Here is a fact that most people don't know. The UN has two agencies for refugees. One for all the refugees in the world, and another one, UNRWA, just for the Palestinian refugees. Sounds crazy, but it is true. Just Google UNRWA. One agency for more than 200 million refugees from 1945 till today, and another one only for the 700,000 Palestinian refugees. The Palestinian refugees also enjoy a different definition to the word refugee. There is a regular refugee and a Palestinian refugee. The Palestinian refugees get to keep the title refugees and pass it on to their children and grandchildren. So with each generation, there are actually more and more Palestinian refugees. Understand, the UN, instead of helping the real people in need, is paying for the grandchildren of the Palestinian refugees from 1948. The Palestinian refugees also hold to the idea of what they called the right of return. This idea is as crazy as if all the, 30, 40 million Germans would want to go back to their grandparents' home in what is today Poland. Yeah, just imagine what would happen if all the 200 million refugees from 48, 47, 49 would want to go back to what was their grandparents' home. Total mayhem. The freedom to complain. Another reason why you hear so much about the Palestinians is that they enjoy the freedom to complain. Let's say that you are watching TV and you see an Arab from Nablus complaining about the Israelis, and you think to yourself, the Israelis are really mean. Now let's think for a second on what you've just seen. A journalist could freely travel to the West Bank, where he could interview whoever he wanted. The person that is being interviewed doesn't have his face blurred, and you see his name on the screen. Now, when was the last time that you've seen a Syrian in Damascus or an Iranian in Tehran complaining about their government? The freedom to complain about the government is a luxury that most people in the world don't enjoy. Now, I hope that day will come and all people in the world will be able to complain about their government. It is very important. But until then, it is important to remember the huge paradox. You don't see and hear the ones who are really suffering, as they are the ones being silenced and you can't hear their voices. Are the Palestinians really suffering that badly? Let's have a look at the facts. In 1967, in the West Bank, the life expectancy was 48 years. Today it is 75, higher than all the Arab countries surrounding Israel. In 1967, there were no universities in the West Bank. Today, there are 11 universities and 13 colleges. In 1967, only 4 Arab settlements had running water. Today, more than 640. In Amman, the capital of Jordan, just tens of kilometers away, there is running water only 1 day a week. The Palestinians get more aid from the United Nations, the United States, the European Union, and the Arab countries than any other group. Somehow, everybody knows that the US support Israel. Nobody knows that the Palestinians get more money per capita than any other group in the history of the world. But what about the killings of Palestinians by the Israeli army? Let's have a look at the numbers. Body count. If a tree fell in a forest and 1,000 cameras filmed it, did 1,000 trees fall? Apparently so. Polls conducted in European countries show that most Europeans see Israel as the biggest threat to world peace. Israel, a tiny democracy in the Middle East. And I don't blame them, by the way. This is what the media has been feeding them for years. Now let's have a look at the numbers. So did you ever think how many Palestinians died from 1948 till today? It's around 20,000. That's it. And I will add that most of them were terrorists. Now let's have a look at who is really killing Muslims in the Middle East. In Syria, in the last 10 years, around 500,000 people died. In Lebanon, about 130,000 dead as a result of the civil war that continued from the 70s to the 90s. In Jordan, the king killed around 15,000 Palestinians in a single year between 70 and 71. About 150,000 died in a war between Yemen and Egypt, and about 1.5 million died in a war between Iraq and Iran. And the list goes on and on. Now, check and see how many articles and publications have been published against Israel in newspapers like the British Guardian or in universities like Berkeley, and how many publications were about the real atrocities that Muslims are committing against one another in the region. Israel is the smallest problem that Muslims have in the Middle East. Too bad that most Muslims and human rights organizations are not honest enough to admit this simple, obvious fact. Back to basics. I'm just an Israeli tour guide with an MA in Israeli history. I'm not the first and certainly won't be the last person that you will hear talking about this issue, though sometimes it is good to go back to basics to see what each side says about itself. In the Israeli Declaration of Independence, it says, "We extend our hand to all neighboring states and their people in an offer of peace." In the Hamas Covenant, it says, "Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam obliterates it." I find it interesting. They don't say that they want a Palestinian state. They say that they want to destroy Israel. And it is not only Hamas, by the way. When the PLO talks about freeing Palestine, they talk about Haifa and Jaffa. The idea that there will ever be a democratic Palestinian state is Western wishful thinking. There are no Arab countries with human rights, democracy, and all the values that are important to us. They want to destroy Israel. I believe them, and so should you. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please subscribe and share this video on social media. If you don't agree with me, then write your reasons below. See you in the next video. Yalla bye. Two late-night show hosts, John Oliver and Trevor Noah, uploaded videos about the latest round of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict a few days ago. They both said basically the same thing and spoke out against Israel. Now, a lot of what they said was wrong, but because we are here to help, we will start with the things they both got right. That Israel is stronger and that there are more casualties on the Hamas side. Yes, Israel is stronger. We tried being weak for a very long time and it didn't work out so well, not only in Europe, but also here in the land of Israel. I could give you 1,000 examples, but here is one. There was a big Jewish community in Hebron. Jews have lived there for hundreds of years, until one day in 1929, many years before the occupation and before the State of Israel was established, their Muslim neighbors decided to kill them. I will leave a link below so you can see what happened there, what happens when Jews are weak. It is not only Jews, by the way. Christians, Yazidis, Armenians, I could go on, or I could just simply say that all minorities living in Muslim countries suffer. There isn't a single minority that is thriving under Muslim rule, but there is a bigger problem here. Since when is being weaker a virtue? You are not morally superior if you are weak. They are also right about the numbers of casualties. They are higher on the Hamas side than on the Israeli side. In Israel, we do all that we can to protect civilians, including the development of the most sophisticated anti-missile system in the world. Hamas, on the other hand, places children next to its rockets launcher, which are located close to schools and hospitals. Now, call me crazy, call me wild, call me a handsome son of Woody Harrelson. But if you shoot at me and my children, I'm going to shoot back. Not doing so doesn't make me moral, it makes me dead. John Oliver, you accused Israel of war crimes for blowing up civilian buildings. So what you are basically saying is that if Hamas shoots from a civilian building and stores its rockets there, then we can't do anything about it? We just sit back and wait? Brilliant idea. Let me tell you what the Israeli military does in order to save the lives of people in Gaza. Before Israel bombs a site, they send a warning, so there will be fewer casualties. From a military point of view, that is a stupid thing to do, but because Israel cares more about the lives of the people in Gaza than Hamas does, the Israeli army goes ahead and does it. If Mexico shoots rockets at Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin, I just love saying that word, Wisconsin. Do you think the US Army would send a warning before responding? If Ukraine shoots 10 rockets at Moscow this afternoon, and there are some casualties in Moscow, how would Kiev look tomorrow morning? It would be easier to count how many people were still alive. The important imbalance between Israel and Hamas is not one of power, but one of morality. Israel is a democratic state with human rights granted to its citizens. Hamas is a Muslim terrorist organization. Look what they teach their children. This is the show they put on at the end of the year. You know, when all the proud moms make videos of their talented children. Would you send your children to this kindergarten? I think you should, in the name of diversity. After you get to know the Hamas way of life, you will appreciate the democracy and human rights heaven you live in much, much more. You will even appreciate Western music much more. Britney Spears' music sounds so much better after you hear Hamas music. Having the Iron Dome to intercept rockets on the Israeli side and shooting rockets from kindergarten on the Hamas side highlights the real difference between how we treat our children and how they do. Now let's talk about where you were dead wrong, John Oliver. You mentioned Sheikh Jarrah. Here is 60 seconds about Sheikh Jarrah, which is 40 seconds too much. It is a neighborhood in Jerusalem, a mostly Arab neighborhood. In this neighborhood, there are 20 houses that belong to Jews. The Arabs who lived in these houses recognized that they belonged to Jews, and they were allowed to stay there for as long as they wanted, but they had to pay rent, which was fixed at a low amount. The Arabs stopped paying rent 20 years ago, so the Jews want their property back. Now, the people who are watching your videos and also my videos are from all over the world, and maybe some of them are watching from La La Land or from Unicorn Country, where life is just hunky-dory, where people have never heard about paying rent. But those who live in the real world know that if you don't pay rent, you will get kicked out of your apartment. I'm sure there are some bigger atrocities happening closer to your home than this story. Now, you might say that this is all part of an Israeli ethnic cleansing campaign, but if that is what Israel is doing, then boy, we are doing it wrong. Set aside the Arab propaganda for a second and take a look at the numbers. The numbers of Arabs in Israel, the number of Arabs in Jerusalem, the number of Arabs in the West Bank. They are all rising. If you want to make a video about ethnic cleansing, you might want to do a piece on the Christians in the Middle East, as they are disappearing fast. Oh, I've already used this example. Yeah, well, I will use it again, seeing as no one else does. John Oliver, if you want to make a piece about people losing their homes in the region, I would say go big, like I would go really big. This dispute over the 20 houses in Jerusalem is big, but a million Syrians losing their homes is a much bigger issue. You can't blame Israel for it, but it is still worth doing a video about it. Trevor Noah and John Oliver, I do appreciate you talking about sensitive issues. It is important, and as late night show host, you need to come up with a lot of different issues to talk about. Because I'm a nice guy and a good friend, I have compiled a helpful list of important, original, and unique topics that somehow don't get any coverage in the media. Let's see what we have. Gay rights in Muslim society. Are we not talking about them because they don't exist? Instead of talking about the Palestinians like everyone else does, you could do a series of videos about people who actually have a long history in the region. The Armenians, much more than just the Kardashians. The Kurds, the Yazidi. People know so little about these groups, I bet most of you didn't even notice I got their flags wrong. What else? Christian communities in the Middle East. Why are they disappearing in all Muslim countries? The list goes on and on. So many important things to talk about. Trevor Noah and John Oliver, leave me your emails below and I will send you the full list. And to finish on a serious note, Trevor and John, it is bad enough that Hamas, a terrorist organization, use civilians as human shields. Don't let them use you as moral shields too. You can do so much better than that. Please share this video. Yalla bye. When will there be peace in the Middle East? As an Israeli tour guide, I get asked about the conflict a lot, and there is an answer. But before I talk about that, I want to mention something that happened a short while ago. An Egyptian actor called Muhammad Ramadan, I hope that I've said his name correctly, had his photo taken with an Israeli singer, Omer Adam, in Dubai. Now, you are probably thinking, okay, so what? Two celebrities having their photo taken together? But in Egypt, it caused a huge scandal, and the actor is now due to stand trial for being in a photo with an Israeli singer, not an Israeli spy. Now, for those of you who don't know, Israel and Egypt signed a peace treaty in 1979. The last time that Israel and Egypt fought against each other was in 1973, almost 50 years ago. Israel gave back every last inch of Sinai, and yet their hate for us remains very strong. And this is Egypt, a country that most of you would not classify as an extreme Muslim country. Take Iran. You all know that the Iranian regime wants to eliminate Israel, but think about it for a second. Israel and Iran are 2,000 kilometers or 1,500 miles apart. There are two countries lying in between, Jordan and Iraq. The Iranians are Muslims, but not Arabs. They have a totally different history, culture, and language to the Arabs in the Middle East, and yet they really, really hate us. If you think that they are just so loving and caring towards the Palestinians, then think again. Have you seen how they treat their own people? Do you know how many Arabs have been killed by the Iranians in recent decades, in the last 40 years? More than 1 million Arabs, mostly Iraqis and Syrians.
So it is not Iran's love for the Palestinians or Arabs that guide them, but rather it is pure hatred toward us Israelis. I could give you more examples involving Lebanon or Jordan, but you get the idea. It's not about the land. I will say a word about the Palestinians, as many think that this is the core of their conflict. But if that were the case, and the Israeli occupation of Gaza and the West Bank were the original sin, then how do you explain the hatred that existed before 1967, before the occupation? In 1947, the United Nations said, okay, let's divide the land into a Jewish state and an Arab state. And the Arabs said no. They said no to Israel before it was even established. By the way, the UN proposed an Arab state, not a Palestinian state. The word Palestinians as to describe a nation and also the words West Bank are new terms that were only invented relatively recently. I won't go too deeply into the historical details, as I've already done that in a different video that I will leave a link to up here. This video is not about the small details, but about the bigger picture that most people miss. Here is something you probably never thought about. Let's, just for a moment, fulfill all the dreams of the Palestinians and large part of the Arab world. Let's imagine that we wake up tomorrow morning and the state of Israel has gone. You know what? Let's make it even better. There aren't even any Jews anymore. Do you think that then there will be peace in the Middle East? No, there will be no peace. You hear so much about Israel in the news that when you hear about peace in the Middle East, you automatically think about Israel and its neighbors. But here is an interesting fact. Israel is responsible for about 1% of death in the Middle East. Who is responsible for the death of 99% of the Muslims? Other Muslims. The war in Syria has nothing to do with Israel. The war in Yemen has nothing to do with Israel. The fact that all Arab countries are dictatorships has nothing to do with Israel. The fact that Christian minorities, ancient communities are being wiped out has nothing to do with Israel. And by the way, I find it interesting that Christian countries care so much about the Palestinians, yet nobody cares about the Christians in the Middle East. The fact that gays are being persecuted in all Muslim countries has nothing to do with Israel. And now we get to the core of conflict. If it is not about the land, then what is it about? It's about values, basic values. So when will there be peace in the Middle East? When Arab countries become democratic, when it is okay to be gay in Muslim society? I think that this is an important point. Think about it. There have been many wars between Muslim countries, yet, as you all know, there has never been a war between two countries that enjoy rights for gay people. But sadly, gay rights are only to be found in very advanced societies. Let's start with women's rights. I started this video with Egypt, so here is another example from there. 80% of Egyptian women endure FGM. I will leave a link to the subject, as I cannot talk about this terrible thing in a video. Here is another example. In Jordan, women need the consent of a man in their family to get married, and they are not allowed to live with a man if they are not married. In the West, they are talking about gender fluid pronouns, which is very important. And in many Muslim countries, if a young woman decides to go out alone without permission from the men in her family, it might well be the last thing she does. Now, you might say that there are extremists everywhere. Well, yes and no. Yes, there are extremists in Israel, there are extremists everywhere. But while in Israel, these extremists constitute a small group that might be loud and take extreme action, they don't represent the majority. In the Arab world, they are not extremists, but rather a majority that dictates policy. Israel is not perfect, but it is much better. And I'm not saying that all Muslims are against gay rights and women's rights. Of course not. But the facts are overwhelmingly clear. There are 50 plus Muslim countries, in almost none of which people enjoy gay rights and equal rights for women. I recently saw a poll that said that even in the UK, half of its Muslim population is against homosexuality being legal. Yeah, being legal, not gay rights. In Israel, the only Jewish country, lesbian couples can adopt children, there is Pride Parade, and there was even a gay minister of justice from the Conservative Party. Now, I know that I will be accused of pinkwashing here, and I accept that, and I will tell you why. gay people, women, and minorities are the vulnerable part of any society. See how they are being treated by the state, and you will know how the state will treat its neighbors. If your neighbor is beating his wife and children, it is only a matter of time before he beats your children. And by the way, in many Muslim countries, a husband is allowed to beat his wife. And with that in mind, I can answer this video's question: when will there be peace, a real lasting peace? When we see free women in Egypt who can enjoy their bodies like the rest of the women in the world, like God intended them to? When there is a gay parade in Jordan? When Syria becomes a democracy? And when Christians flourish in Lebanon? Lebanon was a Christian country until a few decades ago. When Iranians are allowed to drink what they want and the women are allowed to wear what they want, when minorities feel safe in Muslim countries, then and only then there will be true peace in the Middle East. Now, as an Israeli, I really want there to be peace. As a tour guide, I think about the most interesting tour you could do, starting in Egypt, then traveling through Israel, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. This is the grand tour of ancient cultures. But although I, like I think all Israelis, want peace, and such noble dreams are all well and good, a firm grasp of reality is also very important. Just because we want peace doesn't mean that they are ready for it. Sadly, the Arab Spring has turned into a Muslim winter. Instead of the old dictatorships, they now have chaos and new dictatorships. And I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning of the video. My name is Oren, and no, I'm not a Mossad agent, and no, the Israeli government is not paying me. I don't even support Benjamin Netanyahu. Some viewers who cannot handle it when I say that democracy and human rights are not the strong side of the Muslim society may start attacking my hidden agenda. The only thing that I can be accused of, which I will accept with joy, is being a proud Zionist and a proud Israeli. Now, most of my videos are about traveling in Israel, but no matter what the topic of the video, even if I make a video about the best hostels in Tel Aviv, I get so many hateful comments blaming Israel for everything that is wrong in the Middle East that once in a while I feel the need to upload a political video like this one. But do check out my YouTube channel. There you can find a lot of information about Israel that you won't find anywhere else. Please give this video a like, subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment below if you like this video, or even if you didn't. See you in the next video. Yalla bye. That the Jews in Arab countries would now be facing. Hundreds of thousands of Jews from Morocco, Tunisia, Yemen, and Iraq had to flee to Israel after having had to endure an onslaught of violence against them. Israel built refugees camps for these Jews. The thing is that in Israel, we don't call them refugees, as when a Jew comes to Israel, he's not a refugee, but a Jew who is coming home. 800,000 Jews had to flee from Arab countries, which is many more than the 500,000 Palestinian refugees. Jewish property and land that was confiscated by Arab countries is at least 5 times more than what the Palestinians left behind in Israel. So to conclude this topic, I will say that not only were more Jews forced to evacuate, having to leave behind much more property, but also it was the Arabs who started the war in Israel, and the Arabs persecuted the Jews in Arab countries. I have used a lot of different facts and figures here, and people who don't agree with me usually question my facts. I won't provide links to every fact I've mentioned, as this is a YouTube video and not a university paper, but all the facts that I've given here are very basic and easy to check. There is a website that I absolutely love. It is called Google, and you can type in questions like, how many refugees did the partition of India cost? Or in which Muslim country it is okay to be gay? None. Or pogroms in Iraq against Jews, and get answers to your questions. If you want to dive deeper, I can recommend the articles and books of Ben Dror Yemini. I will provide a link to his materials. And now let's talk about the occupation. But first, let's establish which occupation we are talking about, because most Arabs see the existence of the Jewish state in Israel as an occupation of Muslim land. The first sentence in the Hamas constitution is, Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam obliterates it, which is very far from let's have peace. They don't talk about a Palestinian state, but rather they want a Muslim empire. And even the PLO, which stands for Palestine Liberation Organization, was established in 1964, 3 years before the 1967 occupation. So basically, when Arabs talk about occupation, they are against the existence of a Jewish state. I hope that you don't support the Arabs on this one. In 1967, the Arabs threatened to eliminate Israel again, and they lost again. In the media, the area that is in dispute is called the West Bank, but the term West Bank, like the term Palestinians, is very new and was only invented a few decades ago. We prefer to use the name that has been used for thousands of years, Judea and Samaria. The vast majority of Arabs living in Judea and Samaria live under the control of the Palestinian Authority, not under Israeli occupation. Now, most Israelis are against settlements on private-owned Arab land, while being for Israelis living in Judea and Samaria. Here are the Israeli arguments. What do we want us Israelis to do? Withdraw and say, come on, try to eliminate us again? Jews lived in Hebron for hundreds of years until they were murdered by Arabs. So why is it that Arabs can live freely in Jerusalem and Israel and Jews are not allowed to live in Hebron? Why should Judea and Samaria be free of Jews? The Palestinians shouldn't be rewarded for their violence toward Jews. And if the Israeli army needs to protect the Jews in Hebron, so be it. I lived in Germany for many years, and if I had an euro for every time I heard the word Siedlungspolitik, I wouldn't have to ask you to buy me a beer at the end of this video. Siedlungspolitik is the politics of Israeli settlements in the West Bank. This is something of an obsession for the German media and for many other countries as well, I'm sure. I find it really arrogant and patronizing to have so many Europeans and Americans telling us that we are the obstacles to peace. Do you have a solution to or an opinion on the war in Syria or Yemen or Afghanistan or Libya too? Or is it only when it comes to Israel that you are so certain that the Israeli settlements are the root to all problems? Now, I'm a rational person. If you were to tell me, Oren, the settlements are the biggest obstacle to peace, I would say, let's see. The Arabs were violent towards the Jews before 1948 and after 48, before 67 and after 67, before the settlements and after the settlements. Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip. There is not a single Jew in Gaza anymore. And by the way, there was a Jewish community in Gaza, ancient community. But are we closer to peace today? I don't think so. In the Khartoum Resolution in 1967, before the settlements, the Arab leaders declared no peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel, no negotiation with it. The settlements are not a problem. So what is the heart of the problem? If it is not the occupation or the settlements or the refugee problem, then what is it? To understand the real problem as Israelis see it, you need to zoom out. Israelis see a straight line connecting the Muslim violence in Afghanistan to the terrible war in Syria, to the Palestinian, to the terror attack in Europe. If almost all of the 50-plus Muslim countries aren't democratic, it doesn't say anything good about Muslim society. If there is no freedom of speech in Muslim countries, it doesn't give them points. If being gay is illegal in Muslim countries, if women are seen as a property of the patriarchal family, if all minorities in Muslim countries are suffering and shrinking, I find it unbelievable that the persecution of Christians in Muslim countries get almost zero coverage in the media. More than 50,000 Christians have been murdered by Muslims in recent years in Nigeria alone. Have you heard about that? The situation is absolutely insane. Israel evacuates Arabs who haven't paid any rent for 30 years from 20 houses that belong to Jews in Sheikh Jarrah, a mostly Arab neighborhood in Jerusalem, and a majority starts to scream about ethnic cleansing. Now, my English is not great, but if the numbers of Arabs in Jerusalem, in Israel, in Gaza, and in Judea and Samaria is growing, Should we not maybe use a different term? Maybe we should apply the term ethnic cleansing not to what the Jews are doing to the Muslim, but what the Muslims are doing to the Christians. The Middle East used to be full of ancient Christian communities. They are all disappearing. Or more accurate, they are being eliminated by Muslims. If the Muslim world is drowning in a sea of violence, then I will not say good thing about this society, and I will not balance my criticism with, they make great hummus. There is an Australian stand-up comedian, Jim Jeffries, very liberal, very funny, and in one of his shows he says something like, let's laugh about religions, let's laugh about Jews. And the crowd cheers, and he tells his joke, and then he says, let's laugh about Muslims. And then there is a complete silence. The moment of silence in this big hall screams the truth louder than 1,000 articles in Al Jazeera. The reaction of the crowd is genuine, as they can't control it. They can't apply the political correctness filters. You know, you can laugh about the Jews because Jews in Israel, in the US, in Europe, are less violent, and no Jew will attack you for criticizing Jews or Judaism. But once he mentions Muslims, it's a different story. Are there Muslims who want democracy and free speech and who think that gays shouldn't be thrown into jail? Yes, of course they are. But sadly, they are a minority with no power. There were also some great Germans in the 30s and some nice Russians under Stalin. And yet I wouldn't say anything good about Nazis or communists. The Arab Spring, also known in Israel as the Muslim Winter, is a great example of how bad the situation in Muslim society is. Only in Tunisia did the country become more democratic. Other than that, they failed everywhere, in the Middle East and in North Africa, in the Sunni countries and in the Shia countries, in the rich countries and in the poor countries, in the Arab countries and in the Muslim countries. No democracy, no women's right, no gay right, and by gay rights I mean the right to have the head connected to the rest of the body, no freedom of speech, nothing, only dictatorship, civil wars, chaos and hate. Peace will only come when two things happen. First, when the Arab world recognizes a Jewish state in the land of Israel, and second, when Muslim society is democratic, less violent, and more tolerant of Jews, Christians, and independent women. This is, in general, the average Israeli opinion. I think it makes sense. If you agree with me, please give this video a like, subscribe, leave a comment, and help me share the truth. If you like my content and want to see more videos like this, please consider buying me a beer or two or become a member in buymeacoffee.com. I will leave all the links below. See you in the next video. Yalla bye. Hi everyone, I made a few political videos about the Israeli-Arab conflict, 10 things you didn't know about the conflict, when will there be real peace, and a couple of others. And each of these videos generated a lot of comments. As you would expect, some people didn't like what I said. Now, I can't answer all the thousands of comments that I got, but I thought I would at least respond to some of the smart anti-Israel comments. Before I start, just a quick word about the not so smart comments I get, and there are plenty of them. To call what I say propaganda or to say I am biased or a Zionist is not a good argument. In fact, it is not an argument at all. Yes, I am a Zionist, a proud Zionist, but if I say that most Muslim countries are dictatorships without freedom of speech, or that the Jews said yes to the partition plan and the Arabs said no and started a war, you can say that I'm wrong, which I'm not. You can say that what I'm saying is not important or not relevant, but to call me names just because you don't like what I say, you can do better than that. The second thing is rather alarming. I grew up in a left-leaning environment. In Israel, that means not orthodox, pro-human rights and women's rights. And I was taught that racism is a disease of the far right. 99% of comments regarding my skin color, hair color, eye color, and other irrelevant parameters came from the left. You want to call it political identity? Sure, I will call it what it is, racism. If you want to disagree with what I say, let's have a debate. Don't bring up my skin color or my good looks. I will start with a general comment by Alexander. I'm sure this will be blocked, but I can't help but notice the censorship happening in this comment section, scrolling down far and never past a single negative comment. This does not give me a good feeling about how honest you were when you asked for others to point out errors in your claims. Thanks for the comment. I don't delete comments and I don't apply any of the filters that YouTube provides creators with. Some comments, negative and positive, disappear. I honestly don't know why. YouTube removes the dislike button as well, which I find ridiculous. I can see it in the back end, and I will tell you the truth. I have way too many likes for my political videos, and I don't like it. Now, don't get me wrong, I like likes and do give this video a like, but if a political video gets 90% likes, it means that the people who are watching it already agree with me. Sadly, YouTube isn't showing the video to enough people who will disagree with me. I want to see more negative comments. That way I know that I've got through to the other side. One theme that comes up again and again is that I am, or Israel is, a European colonialist project. Nick Fish wrote, let's keep it simple, a people from the first world, North Europe, savvy and well organized. Sparkle wrote, it is not an Arab-Israeli conflict, it is a Palestinian-Israeli occupation issue, European supremacist colonial occupation of the land of the indigenous inhabitants. Fired comments, Israel is a colonial project whose goal is to rid the Europeans of the Jews at the expense of the Palestinians. And there are many more comments of that sort. Now, let's get all the hot air out of this particular balloon. First, most Israelis are Jews who ran away from Arab countries, not from Europe. And second, Jews from all over the world have always come to Israel, from Turkey, Algeria, and Iraq. The first wave of Jews from Europe came in 1882. A few months earlier, a group of Jews came from Yemen, and they settled in Jerusalem, just outside the old city walls. Soon I will be telling you what happened to their village, but it is important for you to know that Jews from all over the world have always come to Jerusalem and to the land of Israel. Yes, in the late 19th century, the waves became bigger because there were better means of transportation, and Jews were being persecuted in Russia. But Jews have always been coming to Israel. There is an important thing to understand. When Arabs stand in Hebron to pray, they turn their back to Jerusalem and face Mecca, while Jews always pray towards Jerusalem. Jews never turn their back on Jerusalem. Next comment. Your knobs start with, so at the beginning of the video you claim you aren't a far rightist. That is clearly the first lie of the video, as you are very obvious a Jewish supremacist, which is far right ideology. I am for democracy, I'm for women's rights, I'm for gay rights, I'm for free speech. Does that make me far right? Or am I far right only if I mention that Muslim society lacks all of these values? York, please enlighten me on this one. Double E continues with this train of thoughts and writes, I dislike and am saddened by the way that you frame Muslim culture. You frame them as unjust, cruel, violent, backwards, and simply fringe. You also did not mention, not even once, the human rights violation. I will avoid the term genocide because then you will ignore everything I have to say that Israel is imposing on Palestinians, or in your words, Arabs. Thank you, Double E. This is a perfect example of many things that are wrong with those who criticize Israel. You and people like yourself blame Israel for the worst crimes in modern history, like genocide, ethnic cleansing, apartheid. If we are carrying out a genocide, how come the number of Arabs is growing? But it saddens you when I say that Muslim society is more violent. If almost all Muslim countries are a dictatorship, it means that they are more violent. If it is illegal to be gay in all Muslim society, if all minorities in Muslim countries are shrinking and disappearing, it means that they are more violent. If there is no freedom of speech, whether among the rich, the poor, the Sunni, the Shia, and the Muslim countries in North Africa and in Asia, it means that Muslim society is more violent. If the Arab Spring didn't bring democracy but mostly wars and chaos, it means that it is a more violent society. If in Europe there is more violence in Muslim neighborhoods from Sweden to the UK, it means that it is a more violent society. And it is not the fault of Israel, the Jews, the West, or colonialism. The blame lies with the Muslim society and its values. If you don't agree with me, prove me wrong. Write to me, hey, I live in Paris or Manchester or Rotterdam, and here the Jewish neighborhoods are more violent than the Arab ones. Next comment from David. You make many points that I have no doubt are valid. Thank you. But you are painting a picture that Israel is totally innocent. That's untrue and you know it. Amnesty International states a long list of crimes that Israel commits today, such as torture, institutionalized discrimination, etc. I'm not against Israel or pro-Palestine, but the truth matters. Thank you, David, for your comment, and I have a few things to say. You are right, Israel is not totally innocent. When you have 19-year-old men and women in the military having to deal with terrorists within a civil population and you don't know who is going to pull out a knife or a gun, there is a lot of mental pressure. Mistake will be made and some soldiers will abuse their power. Combat is hell, and combat in densely populated area is even worse. There are always rotten apples, even in the finest batch. I will tell you something and you can choose whether to believe me or not. I was in Gaza, I served 3 years in the army and then 12 more years in the reserve army. All my friends and my family members served in the army, and I can tell you that the Israeli army makes a tremendous effort not to harm civilians. The thing is that Hamas and Hezbollah take advantage of that, so they shoot from schools, hospitals, and private homes. In Israel, we do whatever we can to protect civilians, whereas they use civilians as human shields. Now, maybe you have watched many hours of news about Israel and you know the Israeli army better than I do. That is a possibility. But here is a thought. Any Israeli soldier can enter an Arab village in Israel and start shooting. We take our machine guns home with us. It has happened only like 3 times in the history of Israel that an Israeli soldier opened fire on Arab civilians in order to kill as many Arabs as he could. Now, how many times have Muslim terrorists deliberately killed Israeli civilians? Thousands of times. And these terrorists are their heroes. The reason I don't speak about the ways in which Israel isn't perfect has to do with 2 things, and you mentioned one of them, the media and human rights organization. Quick example. Do you know how many Syrians died in 2021 in the civil war that is going on there? You don't, because you probably haven't heard too much about it in the media. 3,700 people lost their lives in Syria last year, like 10 people every day, and the world is silent about it. About the same number of Palestinians died in conflict in the last decade. If there were 3,700 Palestinian casualties in a military operation, you would hear about it constantly, 24/7. And Muslim and human rights organizations would demonstrate in every city in the Muslim and Western world. 500,000 Syrians have died in this war in this decade. But the sad truth is that if you can't blame Israel for the death of a Muslim, it is not interesting. In the video about things you don't know about the conflict, I gave many more examples. Millions have died in conflicts in Muslim countries, but you don't hear about them. The media, academia circles, and human rights organizations are absolutely obsessed with Israel. You will hear about the smallest thing that Israel does wrong. Now, you can say that you expect more from Israel as it is a democracy, but if you expect more from Israel, then it means you expect less from Muslim countries, and that makes you a racist. If a foreign reporter in Israel were to be honest, the next report from Israel would be, I'm now standing here with a helmet on my head, not far from the Gaza Strip, and talking as if I'm saying something important. But the truth is that an hour from now, I will be in Tel Aviv drinking a cold beer, enjoying great food, which is way too expensive, fast internet, and freedom of speech. If I was really brave, I would now be in Syria or Yemen, but I love my life, my wife, and my children, so I would rather stay here and hang out with hundreds of other foreign reporters that basically think like me. Back to you, Bill. And if international human rights organization had any dignity, you would mostly be hearing about China, Russia, and the 50-plus Muslim dictatorships. Next comment, which is actually the end of your Knob's comment. You claim the Arabs started the war. That is so heavily simplified, it is essentially a lie. There were armed Jewish militias committing terrorist attacks for over a decade before Israel even became a state. P.S. I'm neither Muslim or Jewish, I'm a Swiss historian. The outside perspective is relevant to avoid bias. Fascism and apartheid is discussing no matter where. I am, as I said, a proud Zionist. There are many things I'm proud of. Israel has achieved unbelievable things. One of the things I'm most proud of that I truly believe says something important about the society you live in is women's rights. Where it is good to be a woman, it is good to be a man. In 1903, the Zionist movement gave women the right to vote, one of the first nations in the world to do so. Your country, and as an historian, no, you don't need to be an historian to know this because it only happened yesterday. Women in Switzerland got the right to vote in 1971, and in some places only in 1989. Your comment is so wrong. The UN partition plan was put to the vote on the 29th of November 1947. The Jews said yes, and the Arabs started to attack Jewish civilians, killing 5 the next day. This is beyond dispute. And about the armed Jewish militias, people who are anti-Israel like to talk about rounds of violence that occurred before the establishment of Israel. No, it was pogroms against the Jews committed by Arabs. Muslims coming out of mosques waving their knives and screaming Itbach el Yahud. Have you ever seen Jews coming out of a synagogue after prayers waving knives and going off to kill someone? Never. The first Arab attack on a Jewish village was in 1886 in Petah Tikva. One Jewish woman was beaten to death. Then there were Arab pogroms against the Jews in 1920, 1921, 1929, and 1936 to 1939. Remember I told you about the Jews who came from Yemen to Jerusalem in 1882? Their village, Kfar Shiloach, was plundered and destroyed by Arab gangs. The British promised the Jews that they would be able to go back to the village, but they didn't keep their promise. And one of the Jews went back to try to save the Torah scrolls and was shot to death. These militias, Haganah, Etzel, and Lehi, were created to protect the Jews, and it is only thanks to them we won the War of Independence, and here we are in prosperous Israel. That's it. I want to thank all my members and supporters on Ko-fi and Buy Me a Coffee who got to see this video first. You keep me going. In order to reach the people who will give this video a dislike, I need you to give this video a like, share it, and add a comment. There are many more negative comments I can respond to, so tell me if you want a sequel. See you in the next video. Yalla bye. There are lots of reports about Israel on the news. Very bad days are behind us and very bad days lie ahead of us. And watching the news gives a false sense of control, as if you are able to better prepare for what's going to happen. But the best way to take control is to disconnect. When I was a child and there was a scary movie on TV, I would just look at the frame around the TV and tell myself that what I was watching wasn't real. And today, as an old man who will be turning 50 in 9 years, I go outside to the desert. Between the news, the things that are happening right now, and a sense of eternity that I cannot really grasp. The desert rocks, these layers that are 50 million years old, make for a good place in the middle, or at least a nice quiet place to try and sum up the current situation. I'm fortunate in that my private situation is much better than that of most Israelis. First, we are not located in the firing zone. Second, there haven't been any alarms here. Third, I haven't been called up to serve, and I will tell you why shortly. And fourth, and this is an important one, we live in a kibbutz, so in a community. In our neighborhood, we all have small children, so it doesn't really matter how you feel. You need to wake up in the morning and make breakfast. Having our children at the center of our lives is the best possible way to manage our mental health. As you probably know, the worst thing is to be alone with your own thoughts. So let's go back to last week, Saturday, October 7th, 2023. I woke up early at 6 a.m. because I'm old. A few minutes later, I heard some booming noises, which is something you hear in the desert when the Air Force does its exercises. But I thought it was a bit weird as they don't normally do that on Saturdays. A few minutes later, I heard an alarm going off in the distance. I went outside to see what was happening and saw that some of my neighbors had started walking to the shelter. All houses built in Israel after the Gulf War, so from 1992 on, have to have a shelter built inside. This is what the shelter in our new house looks like, but we don't live there yet. It is a regular room, but there is this door and a window, and it is built using reinforced concrete. If you live in an older house, like we do now, you need to go to one of the communal shelters. Anyway, we went to our communal shelter with our neighbors. On the news, they were talking about an attack, and if I remember correctly, there was this photo of a pickup truck carrying terrorists, like the ISIS ones, in Sderot, which is a city next to the Gaza Strip. It was totally surreal. I thought it was fake. After a few hours, it had become clear that something really bad was happening, and the first thing that came into many Israelis' head was the Yom Kippur War that started on Saturday, October 6, 73, so exactly 50 years and a day before this attack. There have been a lot of TV series and movies about the Yom Kippur War over the last few months. The war was a terrible trauma. After the Six-Day War of 1967, the Israelis thought that they were undefeatable. In the Yom Kippur War, Israel was caught off guard. Israel was attacked by Egypt and Syria on the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. Israel won after 19 days, but the price was high. 2,700 Israeli soldiers were killed. This was a highly traumatic event, which led to many changes in Israeli society. So in the first 2 days, the main association was with the scandal of the Yom Kippur War. And then as the picture of what happened in those first days became clearer, we started to understand that it was way bigger than a political or military scandal. Hundreds of civilians were murdered in their homes by Arab Muslims. Dozens of Jewish babies and toddlers beheaded. I could go on, but there is no need. You already know what they did to the women. This is Holocaust stuff. The 7th of October was the day on which more Jews were murdered than on any other day since the Holocaust, and they were mostly civilians in their own homes. Many Israelis had and are continuing to have anxiety attacks. This is going to have long-term effects. Like all Israelis, I was surprised, but in a deeper sense, I wasn't, or rather, like the scale of the Hamas attack, their organization, and the timing, of course, surprised me. I never thought that they could manage to do something like this, but I'm not at all surprised by their brutality. Don't know what I'm talking about? Let's do a quick roundup. Lebanon, from the 70s to the 90s, brutal civil war left 150,000 dead. And this may surprise you, but Lebanon is an apartheid state. Palestinians who migrate to Lebanon in 1948, their children and grandchildren can't buy land and are not allowed to work in dozens of professions. The BBC won't be telling you about that. Syria, 500,000 dead in the last 12 years. Jordan, did you hear about Black September when the king ordered his tanks to drive over 3,000 Palestinians. And Egypt is deeply involved in the war in Yemen, which has so far cost the lives of 100 to 200,000 people. If they kill one another with so much enthusiasm, like in Iran they murder women who don't cover their hair, then what will they do to us if they get the chance? Last week we had a taste of it. I wasn't surprised. I'm a tour guide and my YouTube channel provides tips on how to get the most out of traveling to Israel. And every once in a while I would upload a political video like this one. And my friends who are also tour guides would often say to me, why are you mixing these political videos into your travel tips? You're shooting your business in the leg. And I even took the political videos down for a few months and then brought them back. People need to know what is going on. There is an unspoken rule in the Middle East. Muslims kill Muslims, that's no news, nobody cares, not even the Muslims. Muslims kill Jews, that's a tragedy, like an earthquake. But if a Jew kills a Muslim, then all human rights organizations and student organizations wake up. I lived in Berlin for many years, and most of the Israelis there are very left-wing. They hated me for saying that all the values they believe in, democracy, human rights, gay rights, gender fluid pronouns, don't exist in Muslim society. Ask a Muslim what will happen if his or her daughter says she's a lesbian. Try it. And Berlin may be so liberal and free and Berghain and KitKat, but Muslims living in Berlin handed out candy on the streets after the Jews were murdered last week. Israelis are now afraid to speak Hebrew in Kreuzberg and Neukölln, the Muslim parts of Berlin. Multikulti funktioniert einfach nicht. Back to Israel. How is life in Israel right now? Everyone knows somebody who died, so there are lots of funeral and Shiva happening. Shiva is 7 days of mourning in Judaism, 7 days after the funeral, when the house is open and all the relatives, neighbors, and friends can come and pay their respects. It's a genius Jewish idea, and one day I will make a video about it. So many men have been enlisted into the army. In our community, there are about 250 of us, so adults, and around 30 are now in the army. 2 of my brothers are in the army. I was dismissed from the army a few years ago because I'd been trained to use an old tank that was no longer in use. I made a video about my army service. You can check it out if you want to know more. I could volunteer in the army, and in fact there are plenty of people older than me who are doing army service, but I haven't done that for 2 reasons. My wife is German and doesn't have family here, and my parents are helping with my brother's children. And the second reason is that I hope that what I'm doing now, making these videos, is also important. I have promised myself that as long as there is fighting, I will upload videos about the situation to show the world the war from the Israeli side. Every minute that I am not working on these videos, I tell myself, Oren, you idiot, they are fighting, so work on your videos. To that I will add, because the harsh truth must be said, that I'm not such a good soldier. I can shoot, but I don't often hit the target. Many Israelis are now volunteering in different fields. Every community, every city that is far enough away from the fighting costs families from the fighting zone. And because many of them fled without any equipment, Israeli individuals and companies are donating food, clothes, and toys. We are also doing our best to support families when the fathers have enrolled in the army. When it comes to day-to-day life, I will start by telling you something that might sound irrelevant and of minor importance, but that I think is significant. There are only sad, melodic, and hopeful songs being played. In Israel, we have this genre of songs of Memorial Days that is also played on days of fighting. 2 sad songs on the radio, one after another, and you know that something has happened before you even hear the news. A few soldiers have been posted in every village to guard the communities there. Children aren't going to school. Lots of activities are being put on for children in the communities, but kindergartens and schools are closed. As of this week, they are learning at home via Zoom, and we all know from Corona times how effective that was. No, but seriously, as important as it is for children to have routine and to go to school, there are many logistic problems with that. And what would happen if there were rockets? All of the schools have shelters, but still, Israelis now have three main issues on their minds. What will happen in the north with Hezbollah, which is 100 times stronger as Hamas? What will happen with Gaza? And then there is the hostage held by Hamas. To understand how emotional this topic is, I want to tell you something about Dov Bruder. He was an Israeli soldier who fell in the War of Independence, but whose body wasn't ever found. A few weeks ago, 75 years after he fell, his body was found. How was it found? There is a unit in the Israeli military that is dedicated to finding the bodies of soldiers whose fate was unknown. The discovery of his body made it into the first pages of all the newspapers in Israel. So if the Israelis are so obsessed with identifying a soldier who died 75 years ago and bringing him to be buried in Israel, you can imagine what Israelis are prepared to do in order to free Israelis' children who have been captured by Islamo-Nazis. Down below, I will leave links to aid organizations for families whose world has fallen apart. Please consider donating. So these are the main things that are on our minds. If you have any questions, please write them below, and I will try to answer them in the next update. Hoping for better days. Yalla bye.
Not enough work is available to run this building.
Another fact that is often overlooked is that pro-Palestinians are always talking about Jewish immigrants coming from Europe. No one talks about the Arabs who came to the land of Israel. Hundreds of thousands of Arabs from Egypt, Syria, and other places entered the land of Israel in the 1930s and 40s to work for the British and are now seen as native Palestinians. It is hard to estimate the number of Arabs who entered the land of Israel between 1917 to 1947 to work for the British, as the borders were open, but the number is in the hundreds of thousands. Probably about half of the population of Gaza came to the land of Israel during the British Mandate time. Their last names usually hint towards the actual origin of the family. I find it absurd that people like my great-grandmother, who came to Israel from Eastern Europe in the 1920s after dreaming about the Jewish homeland for generations, are seen as white colonialists, while Egyptians who came to work for the British in 1945 are seen as native Palestinians. Now you might be saying, who cares where they came from and if they have been here for generations? They have the right to self-determination. And again, I agree. In 1947, the UN proposed the division of the land into a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jews said yes, and the Arabs said no, and then started a war in a bid to eliminate the Jews. The morning after the partition plan, Palestinians attacked a bus and murdered 5 Jews. This is how the war was started. They were offered a state, they said no, and start murdering Jewish civilians. Not a single Jew was spared in all of the places that fell into local Palestinian hands. Luckily for us, after 15 months of fighting the local Arabs and the 5 Arab armies that invaded Israel, we won. And yes, during the War of Independence, many Arab villages were destroyed and about 700,000 people were displaced. That's what happens when you try to wipe out your neighbors. You might well lose and have to pay the price. At the same time, 800,000 Jews were brutally expelled from Muslim countries. For some reason, no one cares about them or wants to tell their story. Millions of articles and papers have been written about the Palestinians who had to evacuate their homes because of a war they started, yet very little has been written about the Jews living in Muslim countries who were subjected to pogroms and had to flee, even though they were innocent. Please tell me why you care so deeply about the Palestinian refugees, and yet you couldn't care less about all the millions of other refugees who had to flee at the same time. 14 million Germans, about the same number of Hindus and Muslims, Ukrainians, Armenians, Poles, people from the Balkans, and I could go on and on. The Palestinian refugees are the most privileged refugees in the world. Some say that the partition plan wasn't fair, as the Jews made up 1/3 of the population but got 2/3 of the land. To that I will say this: the Arabs actually also got what is now known as Jordan, so in fact the Jews got a much smaller part. And I should also add that the Arabs got all the good land and the Jews got the swampland and the desert land. And now I'm going to state a fact that is definitely going to annoy all the haters of Israel. The Jews took the swampland and the desert land and made the impossible possible. We turned the land into gold. Israel is pioneer in irrigation systems and desalination system. Israel invented vegetables and fruits that can grow in salt water and yet taste sweet. As for the Arabs, the large part of their land is now polluted and contaminated. After 1948, the Palestinians had years to establish a free Palestinian state, as they were under Egyptian and Jordanian rule. Yet they didn't do that. In 1964, the Palestinians established the PLO, or the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Now this is interesting. 1964 is 3 years before the Six-Day War. So before Israel occupied the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and before a single settlement was built, they were already calling for the destruction of Israel. When the Arabs say free Palestine, they don't mean we want an independent Palestinian state next to Israel. What they want is a Palestinian state that replaces Israel. The Palestinians kept rejecting all offers made to them from 1947 till 2008, when Ehud Olmert, the Israeli Prime Minister, offered the Palestinians all the West Bank and East Jerusalem as their capital. They said no to every offer that was made to them, invested all the money they received from the world in terror, and then cried that they were their victims. The Palestinians do have a harder life than we Israelis, but they only have themselves to blame. So what is the solution? When will there be peace? Not in the near future, because this conflict is not about the land. I've already told you that even before the Six-Day War and even before 1948, the Palestinians were trying to wipe out the Jews. Here is another example. Take Gaza. In 2005, Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip. Gaza is an Israeli and Jew-free area. The Palestinians get more money than any other group on the planet, from the US, from the European Union, from Arab countries, from the UN. And what do they do with this money? Infrastructure, education? No, they build tunnels and buy weapons to kill Jews. Why do they do that? The Hamas constitution makes it very clear. The first sentence is, Israel will exist until Islam wipes it out. It doesn't say we want peace. It doesn't say we want a Palestinian state. It clearly says until Islam wipes it out. They want a Muslim caliphate. I respect Hamas for one thing only, for actually expressing and being clear about what they want, which is to eliminate Israel. Personally, I want the Palestinians to have a democratic state with human rights and freedoms, and I wish for all Arabs and Muslims to have the same, but what I want is not necessarily what they want. To solve the problem, you need to understand the problem, and the problem is made up of two things. One which Westerners don't understand anymore, religion, and one which Westerners don't want to talk about, values. Religion plays no role at all in European politics. In the US, politicians do say God bless America, and the debate surrounding abortion is partly religious. But when it comes to foreign policies, you don't hear American generals talk about spreading the word of Jesus. In the Muslim world, it is very different. When Arabs kill Jews at a music festival, or Christians in a school in Nigeria, or one another in Syria, Yemen, Libya, what is it they shout? Allahu Akbar, God is great. Jihad is a religious war against the infidels. To many Europeans, the words infidels and heresy probably remind them of dark days that played out hundreds of years ago, when Catholics and Protestants were killing each other. Sadly, this is still the situation in some parts of the Muslim world. Just think about the organizations you hear about in the Muslim world: Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, the Taliban. These aren't national organizations. they are all religious organizations. Now let's talk about the bigger issue, values. Lots of people run from this as if they were running from fire because the biggest concern is potentially being called a racist. I want to be 100% clear here, although I know that some will do their best to misunderstand me. If I say that men are more violent than women, does it mean I hate all men? No. Does it mean that I think all men are violent? No. Does it mean that there are no violent women? No. But if in almost all countries, more than 90% of those in jails are men, then you can say that men are more violent than women. I believe you can criticize anyone for anything. You can criticize me as a Jew, as an Israeli, as a man, as a tour guide. You can criticize me for things I can't change, like my identity, and for the things I chose, like my profession, the music I like, the fact that I'm a father. My identity is comprised of thousands of different aspects, and you can criticize any one of them, and I can agree or disagree. I can say, true, Israelis aren't very polite and they don't know how to form a queue, but I'm different. And I can also accept the criticism. If you are not a narcissist, you know that you're not perfect. I don't subscribe to the narrative that you're only allowed to say good things about other groups and criticize your own. I actually want to be criticized. I want to be made to think, to be made to improve my ways. The Me Too movement made me rethink the way I interact with women and made me more aware of the language I use. I criticize all groups, Americans, Germans, Britney Spears fans, ultra-Orthodox Jews, women, Gen Z, and Muslims. I even criticize the most dangerous group of all, Israeli mothers. If a teacher writes that she is sick, there is no need for 30 get well soon messages. You don't show that you care by writing a message. You are just spamming my WhatsApp. If there were peace in all of the Middle East and only the Arab Muslim Palestinians were resorting to violence, I would say, okay, maybe we are in the wrong. But if the Palestinians were using violence before 1967 and before 1948, and almost all of the Arab Muslim countries are dictatorships with high levels of violence and low levels of human rights, then maybe there's really a problem here. I'm also getting comments from Muslims blaming colonialism and the Americans for all the problems in the Muslim world. And it is true that the creation of many countries and borders in Africa and Asia were determined by the interest of the European empires, and that the US think primarily about its own interests. But I'm always shocked to find that Muslims take no responsibility for their wrongdoing. The fact that most of the Muslim countries aren't democratic has nothing to do with the US. The fact that 17 of the 20 most dangerous countries for the LGBTQ community are Muslims has nothing to do with colonialism. The fact that almost all of the most dangerous places in the world to be Christians are Muslim has nothing to do with imperialism. The Muslim world is huge. It has a lot of oil, and its failure has very little to do with colonialism. Look at the Jews. 1/3 of them were murdered by the Nazis. Israel has no oil, and it is surrounded by enemies, and yet we are successful. And it's not because of American money. Most of that money has to be used to buy military equipment from American companies. And beside, the Palestinians get way more money. We are successful because we are open-minded, think outside the box, invest in education, and are not violent. This is true outside the Middle East too. Look at Arab Muslim communities in Europe. If there were violent riots in Paris or Sweden, Rotterdam or London, would it be in the Jewish neighborhoods or the Arab neighborhoods? Peace will only come when the Arabs change their values, when Muslim countries become democratic, when all of the different groups in Syria stop killing one another, when Iranian women are free to cover or not cover their hair, when gay men are not thrown from rooftops in Gaza or thrown into jail by the PLO, when the Christian population stops shrinking in the Middle East, and when the Israeli Arabs stop killing one another, then and only then will there be true peace. Please like and share this video with any friend who needs to see this. I have much more to say about this topic, so please write a comment. If you find it interesting, please consider supporting my work. All the details are below. Yalla bye. Watch the news coming out of Israel and Gaza, and you will see terrible images on both sides, families being ripped apart, people crying out for help. And you might also see that the number of casualties on the Palestinian side is higher, and that Israel is stronger with its air force, its tanks, and high-tech weapons. And you will see the poor people in Gaza carrying their belongings on donkeys. When you see these powerful images, it is very easy to be pro-Palestinian. And it is true. Israel is stronger and the Palestinians are weaker and suffering more casualties. But is this a whole story? If there are more casualties on the Palestinian side, does it mean that they are right? Is this the way to measure the conflict? I'm not so sure. Before I start, there is one point I want to make very clear. I'm truly sorry when innocent Palestinians who are not connected to Hamas or any of the other terrorist organizations get hurt or killed. And most Israelis are like me. If innocent Palestinians die, we will not be celebrating on the streets and handing out candy on the streets, not in Israel and not in any Jewish community around the world. So if Israelis are such good and moral people, why are there so many casualties? One of the reasons you are so shocked by what you are seeing is that you probably don't know what war is. When I see what's on the news in the West, can a man who feels like a woman compete against biological females in sport? And the pronoun thing, I like to have a laugh about it, but I actually really envy you. If this is all you're dealing with, man, your life is just hunky-dory. Your life is a cold beer on a hot day. I'm not justifying the killing of civilians in any way, but war is hell. Let me tell you something you probably didn't know. We also shoot our own soldiers. When you have the Air Force, the artillery, the tanks and infantry, we often shoot at one another and accidentally kill one another. It is tragic, and the Israeli army does its best to prevent it, but it does happen. And it happens not just in Israel, but in all armies, in all wars, in Kosovo, in Ukraine, in Iraq. If you compare the civilian casualty ratio for Israel and other Western armies, you will actually see that Israel's numbers are lower. War is a terrible thing, but we are fighting for our lives and we are fighting for something we strongly believe in, the existence of a democratic Jewish state. I won't go into the history of the conflict. I've already done that in previous videos, but I just want to show you one picture, which to me sums it all up. Most Israelis don't know this picture and the story behind it. On the 29th of November 1947, the UN said, okay, let's divide the land into a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jews wanted it all for themselves, and the Arab wanted it all for themselves. The Jews were willing to compromise and said yes, and the Arabs said no, and the first thing they did was to shoot at this bus and murder 5 Jews. They were offered a state, they said no, and they started killing Jews. This is the start and the heart of the matter, and nothing ever changed. Today, as in 1947, Israelis cherish life and are willing to compromise, and Hamas, Hezbollah, and many of their friends cherish death. It is not just my opinion. They say it about themselves. They say that they will win because they love death like we Israelis love life. We Israelis say the opposite, that we will win because we love life more than they love death. In the Hamas constitution, they say that jihad is the path and dying for God is their greatest wish. In the Israeli Declaration of Independence, it says, we extend our hand to all neighboring states and their peoples in an offer of peace and good neighborliness. Can you hear the difference between the Muslims and the Jews, between we want to die in jihad and we offer our hand in peace? This is important because the Palestinians live by their values. I hate it when Westerners say, oh, they are only saying that because they are poor and living under harsh conditions. That is a patronizing view. Don't patronize. The Palestinians truly believe in jihad and they educate their children this way. Would you send your children to this kindergarten? This isn't even an extreme example. When the media talks about the hundreds of children dead in Gaza, they almost always show you the little girl who died. They never talk about the hundreds of 16 to 17-year-old terrorists who die in combat but are still counted as children? Think about it. When have you ever seen a graph of the ages of the children who died on the BBC? It would take seconds to make. You have never seen it because most of them are 16 and 17-year-old fighters, and that doesn't fit the narrative. I'm using the BBC as an example, as of all the major respected media groups. The BBC is considered in Israel to be the most anti-Israel, but there are others. Another reason why there are so many Palestinian casualties, and another fundamental difference between Israel and Hamas, is that Israel does everything it can to protect civilians and children. Israel developed the Iron Dome system, an air defense system that intercepts rockets. This is an amazing photo in which you can see Hamas launching dozens of rockets aiming at civilians, and on the other side you can see Iron Dome rockets. Each Iron Dome rocket knows which Hamas rocket it is going to intercept. This system was developed thanks to the US. So if you are from Wisconsin or one of the other 49 states, thanks. On the other hand, let me show you what Hamas does. They shoot a rocket and gather children next to it so that if the Israelis shoot back, their children get hurt and they can say that Israel is barbaric. Hamas shoots rockets from schools and hospitals and uses women and children as human shields. And now I will say something that some of you won't like. If you shoot at me from a school or a hospital or from a gay parade, I will shoot back. If your moral standards are so low that you intentionally put your own children at risk, then their blood is on your hands. Israel does more than any other army in the world to warn civilians. Let me give you another example that Israelis and Palestinians know about, but the BBC probably hasn't told you about. Let's say that Israel finds out that Hamas is storing missiles in a building where there are civilians. Instead of bombing the whole building up before Hamas starts shooting the rockets, Israel does what is called knocking on the roof, where they shoot a few rounds at the roof to let people know they should get out of there, and only then do they bomb the building. I'm really curious to know if that's something you were aware of. Please let me know in the comments below. As far as I know, you can see 1,000 reports from Gaza, but the media will not talk about it. Just because the Palestinians are weak and we are strong, it doesn't make them morally right. Weakness is not a virtue. There is the argument, which I find to be really unconvincing, that the Arabs have no other option because they are so weak. What can they do? They are no match for our tanks. To answer this, I want you to meet my grandfather. My grandfather was in the Palmach, one of the paramilitary Jewish groups that fought against the British from 1945 to 1948. My grandfather broke into British military bases to steal weapons. He blew up bridges and railways. Here is a list of what he and his friends didn't do. He didn't rape British women. He didn't kill British children. He didn't kill British civilians. My grandfather is a nice guy. No, seriously, the Jewish organizations who fought the British Empire, didn't kill civilians. You can be both weak and moral. Now, at this point, all those who disagree with me will be jumping up and saying that I'm lying and that the Etzel, one of the Jewish organizations, blew up the King David Hotel, which proves that the Jews aren't as moral as they say they are, and that the Jews were like the Hamas. I have two responses to that. The first is that the King David Hotel was used by the British Army as their main office building. So despite its name, King David Hotel, it was a legitimate military target. There was no music festival at the hotel in 1947. And Etzel also gave a warning before they blew it up. But the British commander said that he didn't take orders from Jews. And the second thing is that there are always exceptions. I'm not claiming that Jews are perfect or saint-like. A few years ago, an ultra-Orthodox Jew murdered a teenage girl at a gay parade in Jerusalem. Does that mean that ultra-Orthodox Jews kill secular Jews? No. Does that mean that it's dangerous to be gay in Israel? No. This is an extreme example that shows how the opposite is the norm. There have been a few incidents where Jews have intentionally killed Arab civilians. These events are very rare. On the other hand, Hamas and other Palestinian organizations carried out thousands of attacks on Jewish civilians. before the State of Israel was established and after it was established, before the occupation and after the occupation, before Israel withdrew from Gaza and after Israel withdrew from Gaza. As I said, they love death. I find the West so naive. You keep sending them money and hoping for development and less hatred. Give them more money and more support, and they will build more rockets and spread more death. A chicken doesn't give you milk just because you feed it hay. Does Hamas represent all Palestinians? No, but two important notes. Hamas is not a small organization that took over Gaza. Hamas is part of a huge Muslim movement called the Muslim Brotherhood, which has hundreds of millions of Muslim supporters in the Muslim world. What percentage of the Palestinians support Hamas? It is hard to say because they are not great fans of democracy and election, but it is a fair amount. And now I'm going to say something that some of you will find extreme and offensive, so trigger warning. Are you ready? The Palestinians are also responsible for their situation. Take the Germans. Today in Germany, it is unacceptable to say that the Nazis were a small group, only 37%, so technically a minority, and that most of the Germans were nice, normal people, and only the Nazis who worked in the death camps were responsible for the Holocaust. It is not acceptable because it is not true. Did all Germans kill Jews and Russian prisoners of war? No, but they were all responsible for it. It's the same with the Palestinians. The West tends to treat the Arabs with kid gloves as victims of the circumstances, which is actually very patronizing. The Palestinians brought Hamas on themselves. They support Hamas and its values of war and death, and they have to live with the consequences of what they have done. When you are watching the news from Gaza, you have to remember that Hamas controls everything you see from Gaza. Go to the BBC website, look at their videos from Gaza. Look at 50, 100, 500 videos. And tell me if you find a single video in which someone in Gaza criticizes Hamas. Don't you find that strange or even suspicious that no one says anything bad about Hamas? And the reporters don't ask any hard questions. It's always the same. Tell us how much of a victim you are and how bad the Israelis are. If you want to find an Israeli who criticized the Israeli government, it wouldn't take you very long. I think the Israeli government should resign, not because of the crisis, which would have happened under any government anyway, but because of how they responded in the first week after the attacks, or rather, how they didn't respond. They disappeared from view and were completely dysfunctional. The title of this video is Why There Are So Many Palestinian Casualties, but the fact is that the real number of Palestinian civilians casualties is very low. You hear so much about it, not because the numbers are high, but because it is safe for journalists to be there, because Israel is a democracy and you can stand in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and criticize Israel. If you zoom out for a second, you will see that the highest numbers of civilian casualties in recent years have been in Sudan, Yemen, and Syria, where there are no cameras. And this is something else that the media isn't talking about. The Gaza Strip is a gold mine for the foreign press. You can eat the cake and avoid the calories. You can show war and remain relatively safe. Israeli strikes are very precise, and often, as I said, Israel gives warnings before it sends its bombs. If foreign reporters were truly honest, they would start every report from Gaza like this. First put on their serious face and then say, "Thank you, BBC London, for sending me here and not to a place where real atrocities are happening. I could die if I were somewhere like Syria or Yemen, Sudan or Iraq. I will now show you what Hamas wants me to show you." I hope I've given you some points to think about when you hear reports from Gaza. This just happened as I was editing this video. The hospital in Gaza was bombed. The BBC immediately blamed Israel. First, they blame us and put the word out. Now we know that it was actually a Palestinian rocket. The BBC will not call Hamas a terrorist organization, but it is prepared to immediately accuse Israel for the death of hundreds of civilians. This is one more way to make you believe that Israel is killing children, lying and not checking the facts. Shame on you, BBC. And one last comment. I've been getting some criticism for not providing evidence that support what I say, and it is true, I don't. And the reason for that is that everything I say is pretty basic. There is a site I like, it's called Google. You can head there and Google many of the things I said. The 1947 partition plan, the Iron Dome system, the Israeli Declaration of Independence, can chickens give you milk, roof knocking, the terrible, terrible war in Yemen, and the Hamas constitution. That is actually a really good idea for a pro-Israel video, just reading the Hamas constitution. Nothing would make them look worse than showing what they say about themselves. If you want to help, please consider donating to Israelis who have lost their homes. I will leave a link below. My next video is going to be about the very weird connection between the left, the Palestinians, and the Muslim world. If you find that interesting, please consider subscribing. See you in the next one. Yalla bye. This video is about a very weird connection between the Arab world and parts of the left when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and actually the strange connection between the left and the Arab world in general. I think that you will find it interesting regardless of whether you support the Israelis or the Palestinians. In the protests against Israel, you see Arabs and Muslims marching together with left-wing organizations, student organizations, and even climate activists. And my question is, which of the values that the left claims to hold, democracy, human rights, gay rights, women's rights, can be found in any Arab Muslim society? Not only do they not have any values in common, but everything that the left hates and criticizes about the conservative parties in their own countries is 10 times, if not 100 times worse in any Muslim society. To this, I will add that this is a very one-sided relationship. Have you ever seen any Arabs demonstrating for women's rights? I don't know how much experience you have of relationships, but one-sided relationships are never very healthy. They're not good for you. Not all of the left wing is communist, and it is legitimate to criticize Israel. But when large parts of the left criticize Israel more than they criticize all the communist and Muslim countries put together, then it makes me wonder. The left is secular, but Muslim society is extremely religious. The left says it supports women's rights, but Muslim women don't enjoy the same rights as men. It is the same when it comes to minorities in Muslim countries. If you are a left-wing activist, please let me know in the comments below which of those values cherished by the left can also be found in Muslim society. I've seen this funny meme of queer for Palestine, and next to it says chickens for KFC, and that pretty much sums it up. If you are queer or gay or lesbian or non-binary or transgender, trust me, you don't want to be in the hands of Hamas. Do you know what Hamas does to gay people? The same thing they do to Jewish babies. It is not just Hamas. In almost all Muslim countries, you don't want to be gay. Of the 20 most dangerous countries for gays, 17 are Muslim. And even in the West, in the most liberal cities on the planet, Berlin, London, Paris, you don't want to be gay in the Muslim communities in those cities. Below, I will leave a link to a poll done in the UK about the views of Muslims towards gays. Half of the respondents said it should be illegal to be gay. And the Muslim communities are the fastest growing ones in the West. So if I were European, I would say to the Muslims, Sabah al-Khair, these are our core values. Do you disagree? Do you think it should be illegal to be gay? Great, go back to Iran, Iraq, or Syria and enjoy your life under Muslim rule. Respect our values or go back to your countries. I think that's totally fair. Actually, it is the only fair thing to do if you don't want gays to be persecuted in London and Berlin 30 years from now. Let me remind you that Berlin was probably the most gay-friendly city in the world in the 1920s, and you know what happened in the 1930s. Today it is here, tomorrow it is there, gays are just one example. I can give you more regarding minorities and women's rights. It is so easy. Give me one minority that is thriving in countries or areas under Muslim rule, you won't find any, not even one. From Morocco to Iran, you won't find any. Maybe you agree with me and maybe you don't. What I can say is that my biggest supporters are not Israelis, but minorities from Arab countries, Christians from Nigeria and Iraq, many Iranians, Kurds, and all of them say the same things. Westerners don't have a clue about what it is like to live in fear under Muslim rule. Those who don't like what I say don't usually oppose the exact details of what I'm saying. You know, you can't really claim that you want to be a lesbian in Arab countries. Instead, they attack me in general for criticizing Muslim society. How dare you criticize Muslim society? I do it easily. I believe we should be allowed to discuss these aspects of the discussion. It is way too important to just neglect them for fear of being politically incorrect. So yes, I dare to criticize Muslim society because I'm a liberal and I have a set of values I believe in. Many of my friends in the West are confusing two terms that are actually almost the opposite to each other, multiculturalism and liberalism. As a liberal, I believe in individual freedom, freedom of speech, democracy, and women's rights. And there are many movements that I find wrong. Fascism, communism, Nazism, radical Islam. Let's bring the differences between multiculturalism and liberalism back down to earth. If you have a neighbor who beats his wife and tells you that this is their tradition, that his father beat his mother and his grandfather beat his grandmother, would you accept this as a multicultural person, or would you stand up for your values as a good person? By the way, in some Muslim countries, men are allowed to beat their wives. Below I will leave a link to a video from a television show made by the official Palestinian authorities on how you should beat your wife. Here is another example. One of the differences between men and women is that women have an organ that has no other purpose than to give the women pleasure. What a great gift. In Egypt, which is not considered to be extreme, they cut this organ off in 80% of girls. If you see yourself as multicultural, do you think that's okay? Have you ever heard about it? Have you ever seen feminists demonstrate against it? I can give you many more examples. Now, I know what you're going to say, that I'm trying to divert away from the subject and that two wrongs don't make a right. But please wait. This weird connection between the left and the Arab world and their shared hostility toward Israel didn't start yesterday. So interestingly enough, there used to be good connection between the left and Israel. It was initially the Labour Party that was in charge of Jewish institutions in the decades before and after the establishment of Israel in 1948. Many European Jews saw the Soviets as liberators in World War II. The Soviet Union even voted for the establishment of Israel, mainly to kick the British out of the area. But at the beginning of the 50s, their attitude changed, and there was a series of anti-Semitic show trials in the Soviet Union. They were called the Slansky trials, the Doctor's Plot, and the Nights of the Murdered Poets, all against the Jews. And then from 1955, the Soviets started selling weapons to Arab countries. In 1964, the Palestinian Liberation Organization was established. I will say that again, it was established in 1964, 3 years before the Six-Day War, and before the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, before there was a single settlement. So what did they want to liberate? Could it be that by liberation they meant the destruction of Israel? Anyway, which country was the first to recognize the PLO, the Palestinians? Is Germany, a communist dictatorship that built a wall to imprison its own people, denying them their freedom and cutting them off from families and friends. It's like, tell me who your friends are and I will tell you how much of a terrorist you are. There were also connections between Arab countries and left-wing organizations in the West. Let's stay in Germany. There were two main extreme leftist organizations in the 60s, the RAF and the Revolutionary Cells. They were both communist, anti-colonialist, anti-capitalist, anti-Semitic, and of course, anti-Israel. They fought together with Arab terrorists against Israelis. Now, this is some high-level cookiness. They were based in West Berlin, a half city that was surrounded by East Germany. Their friends, families, and neighbors were suffering under the communist dictatorship literally 50 meters away from them. But how were they going to make the world a better place? By supporting Arab terrorists, of course. In 1976, 2 German terrorists and 2 Arab terrorists kidnapped an Air France plane to Entebbe in Uganda. It was the German terrorist Wilfried Böse der Böse who freed all the non-Jewish passengers and kept all the Jews on board hostage. It is interesting to see the anti-Semitic tradition here. His father selected Jews as a Nazi, and Wilfried Böse der Böse did it as a communist. The beauty of tradition. Israel freed their Jews in an unbelievable military operation in which Yoni Netanyahu, the brother of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, was killed. In the last few years in Germany, there's been a wave of nostalgia for these left-wing terrorist groups. I wonder if it would be the same if they were from the far right. For some reason, the far left has this halo. It's like we murder people, but we read books and use complicated words, so it's okay. Listen to us. We know how to create a utopian society. So what do the left and the Arab world have in common? It is something both do extremely well, and that something is hate. In this field, both the Arab world and the left have tremendous success, phenomenal success. No one does it better than them. I will start with the left. I think, and this is only my personal opinion, that 100 million dead is quite a lot. In every place where Marxist ideas have been deployed, there have been zero freedom, extreme suffering, camps where people will work to death, fear, and millions of dead. The Soviet Union, China, North Korea, Cuba, and the Eastern European countries. It has failed everywhere and brought a tremendous amount of suffering. The biggest murderers in the 20th century were Mao Zedong and Stalin. Hitler only comes in third. In the Arab world, it is the same. I get so much hate from Arabs, and they blame the Jews in Israel for colonialism and the West for everything. But what is going on in Muslim countries? In recent decades, almost all Muslim countries have fought wars resulting in 10 times, if not 50 times more casualties than in Palestine. The war between Iraq and Iran, 1 million dead. The war in Syria, 500,000 dead and counting. In Yemen, Sudan, millions have died. Lebanon, Libya, Pakistan. Of the 50+ Muslim countries, hardly any have democracy. The Muslim world is extremely violent to one another and to non-Muslims. In many ways, the Muslim world today is where the Christian world was 400 years ago. Think about it. There are millions of dedicated Catholics and there are millions of Protestants. 400 years ago, they were killing each other. Today, even though they still believe in different things, Protestants and Catholics have stopped using violence. This is not the case in the Muslim world. The hate of the Muslim world and of the neo-Marxists is not only limited to their own territories, but it is aimed at the basic values of our Western society, at the fact that individual freedom takes center stage. In the US, you can stand in the middle of the street and shout that you hate Jesus. You can stand in the middle of the street in Israel and shout that you hate God. You can also do it in a Muslim country, but it will be the last thing you ever do. The left does the same. They forbid people to speak if their opinions are not the right ones. Do you know the book 1984 by George Orwell? People from the left like to like it, but they don't understand that it's describing them. Cancel culture, language control, the words you're not allowed to say, but it is more than that. The left wing take these theories of power and control and enforce them in all parts of society and culture. It looks at the world through these glasses that reduce the complex reality to power struggle. Is that all there is to your life? Men against women, black against white, oppressors and oppressed? Really, what a sad and stupid way to look at life. Here is another interesting point. The far right says what it thinks, they hate Jews and other minorities, and they actually say it out loud. Hitler, for example, spoke his mind. We may not like what he said, but he was at least very clear. If someone hates me, then I don't like it, of course, but I prefer to be aware of it. Those on the extreme left, on the other hand, talk about equality, human rights, and noble ideas, and kill millions. Stalin, Lenin, Mao, all of them spoke very nicely about progress and equality and murdered tens of millions of their own people. And the crazy thing is that the only place in the world where communism is how it was probably meant to be is Israel. The kibbutz movement is the only place where tens of thousands of people have voluntarily lived in a true socialist society for decades. Only the Jews have succeeded in bringing these nice ideas to life, at least for a while, but in the end it collapsed here as well. So if you truly believe in the values of communism, you should be pro-Israel and also come and see for yourself why it eventually failed. The kibbutz still exist, but most of them are privatized. I can't say exactly when I formulated the political views I hold today. They evolved throughout the years and throughout my studies. I also have an MA in history and political science, but I know exactly when I encountered this weird connection between the left and the Arab world. It was in the summer of 2006. I went on a World War II trip from Normandy to Stalingrad. I drove all across Europe. It was a crazy trip. I slept one night in Treblinka, met Churchill's daughter. It was also the time of the Second Lebanon-Israel War, and I was shocked. At the anti-Israel demonstrations, I saw the hate in the eyes of the Muslims and the lefties that went along in London, in Paris, and in Berlin. Now, that was also the time of the war in Sudan, a war that is still going on. In Sudan, there were about 500,000 dead and 3 million refugees. No one was demonstrating for them. You might say, well, just because there are other more terrible things happening elsewhere, that doesn't justify terrible things in other places. Well, if you are silent about the death of 500,000, but absolutely outraged about the death of 1,000, then you need to check yourself. You might need to confront your own values. The levels of selective outrage of the left and the Arabs are staggering in their hypocrisy. Today it is no different. Take the war in Syria. 500,000 dead, and that is a tragedy. But Israel defending itself, and large part of the left are outraged. I guess that if a Muslim dies and you can't blame Israel for it, then there is no need for demonstrations. I guided Israelis around Berlin for 10 years. I've been close to the Reichstag and the Brandenburg Gate hundreds of times and seen lots of demonstrations there. Some of them were a gathering of brave Iranians, Syrians, and Muslims speaking out against the true atrocities in the Muslim world. But these demonstrations were small and polite and had no support from the loud human rights groups that love to criticize Israel. It is not caring about Gaza or loving the Palestinians that brings large part of the left and the Arab world together. It is hatred for the Jewish Western state of Israel. Hamas says it best. Israel will exist until Islam wipes it out. That is the first sentence of their constitution. The glue that holds part of the left and the Arab world together from the 50s right up till today is hatred for Western democracy and what it stands for. Today you can see it in Israel. Tomorrow it may well be happening in your country. A few final comments before I say yalla bye. I get a lot of emails asking me to publish my content on Instagram and TikTok and to add translations into various languages. Guys, I'm only one person. I don't have a crew. It is just me, my iPhone, and a few people walking by who don't understand why I'm standing on the wet grass at 7 in the morning and talking to myself. Also, I like the YouTube format of long content. If you want to use my political videos, I have a playlist of them on my channel. You can download them, edit them, cut them, add effects, music, translation, and dub me using AI tools, whatever you want. And you don't need to worry about copyrights or give me credit. Just do what you think is best and upload to your Instagram and TikTok accounts and spread the word. Please like, subscribe, and share this video with friends who need to see this. I want to thank all my supporters from the bottom of my heart for supporting me. Only with your help can I keep publishing these videos. You keep me going. There is no other way to say it. I love you. See you in the next videos. Yalla bye.
Leaving now, yes? Location noted. Set us a task. Okay, horses. Where are a message from the sheriff. Why don't you go and play with someone else?
The Zionists stole the Palestinians' land, massacred them, and kicked them out of their homes. That is what you hear from the Palestinians and their supporters. In this video, I will be discussing the Nakba, which is the Arab name of the Palestinian disaster of 1948. I will be covering the partition plan, Plan Daled, Dir Yassin, and much more. But this time, my approach will be to take a video by Vox Media Group that talks about that same subject but from a Palestinian point of view, and then we could dismantle it together. Just so you know, Vox is an American progressive media group that was founded by Ezra Klein, an American Jew. I chose this video because it was carefully crafted to show the Palestinian narrative. Let's start, as there is a lot to unpack. I've added timestamps so you can jump to the Dir Yassin or Plan Daled, and I've also left a link to the full Vox video below.
That history has been carefully concealed, purposefully distorted, and in the West, largely forgotten.
This is a good one. I like the effect of having the Hebrew document and all the lines crossed out in black, as if they are onto a really big secret, really concealed and forgotten in the West. Dir Yassin has probably had more articles and papers written about it than any other event in the war of 1948. The number of dead was around 100. There are not many events with such a low number of casualties that have gotten so much attention. I will be coming back to this towards the end of the video.
The massacre in this village was one of many in a series of catastrophic events.
Really? Then why is Dir Yassin always the example given? It's like when you only have one example, so you just say, etc.
When hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were violently displaced from their homeland in order to create the state of Israel.
This is key to understanding the false Palestinian narrative. No, this is not what happened. The Palestinians were offered a state, they rejected it, they started to kill Jewish civilians, and then lost the war that they had started. More about that shortly.
The borders of Palestine have been changed forcefully over time, but historically, this region has been home to Palestinians for centuries.
I've said it many times before in different videos, but I'm happy to repeat it again here. No, not true. Until the beginning of the 20th century, there was no such a thing as Palestinian people. Thousands of pilgrims visited the land of Israel in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. Not a single one of them saw or met a Palestinian. At the time of the Ottoman Empire, which used to control the region, there were Muslims, Arabs, Bedouins, Christians, Jews, Druze, Circassians. All people have the right to self-determination, but you don't have the right to reinvent history.
Migration helped the Zionist movement gain steam, and a slogan took off: a land without people for a people without land.
And it sends a message to Western leaders that the people who had been living in Palestine for generations could just be easily moved elsewhere.
Here we have just 4 sentences, and Vox managed to squeeze so much misinformation into them. Vox want to show you that the Jews planned the transfer of the Arabs. The thing is that in all Zionist documents, from the first Zionist Congress to the Israeli Declaration of Independence, there is absolutely nothing to support this theory. They actually state the opposite, that all people will enjoy equal rights. The slogan, "A land without people for a people without land," was said by Israel Zangwill at the end of the 19th century in Britain. At that time, the land of Israel was a neglected part of the Ottoman Empire. So to take a sentence that was said in Britain about 30 years before the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and to claim that that was the policy in the 1930s is pure manipulation. It is claimed in the video that it sends a message to the West that people could be easily removed. Who sends a message? The Zionist movement never said anything about removing non-Jews from the land. On the contrary, the Zionist movement said very clearly that all people from all religions could be granted their human rights. Now, the next sentence is the true masterpiece of misinformation. I will say that when you talk about any subject, there will probably be different opinions, and it is hard to know all the details, and you might forget those facts that are not in your favor. But this next sentence shows that they do know the facts, but just turn them around.
Violence broke out, rooted in tensions over land.
Violence broke out, just out of the blue. This is like saying in 1939, violence broke out in Europe and the British bombed Germany, or in 1941, violence broke out and the Americans bombed Japanese cities. And now for the truth. In 1920, 1921, 1929, and from 1936 to 39, Arabs attacked the Jews. There were brutal attacks and pogroms against Jews in Jerusalem, Jaffa, Galilee, and Hebron, and in Gaza. Even Israelis don't know this, but until 1921, there were Jews in Gaza. Many ancient Jewish communities, a lot of which had nothing to do with Zionism, were wiped out. The bottom line is very clear. Arabs attacked the Jews, destroyed ancient communities, burned Jewish villages to the ground, and killed Jews living in Jewish settlements. In one of my latest videos, I showed the names of some of the Jewish settlements that were destroyed by Arabs. I will show it again. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, before any Arab left his home, for reasons I will be coming back to, Jews were being attacked, ancient communities were being destroyed, and Jewish settlements were having to be abandoned. This is not the odd bout of violence. This is continuous violence being perpetrated against the Jews by the Arabs. So it is not like violence just broke out in 1948, as Vox would have us believe. Let's continue. The next one is also a big one.
And the British began training and arming Zionist militias to suppress the rebellion.
So the British trained the Jews? What can I say? It is true. But Vox has forgotten to mention two important points. First of all, they trained Arabs as well. Both Jews and Arabs work for the British, also as armed forces. And second, they forgot to tell you that in World War II, the British trained the Jews because the Arabs had already made a pact with the Nazis. Silly Vox, they forgot about that. This topic deserves its own video, but here is a brief summary of what happened. The leader of the Palestinians, Amin al-Husseini, lived in Nazi Berlin for 3 years during the war. He met with Hitler and other high-ranking SS officers. The plan was that when Rommel conquered the Middle East, a death camp would be set up in the Dotan Valley and run by the Arabs. Rommel was stopped by Montgomery in El Alamein, but there was another Nazi Arab plan called Operation Atlas. The plan was that a few
Köszönöm szépen.